May 5, 1945, 5 days after Hitler's death. The war in Europe is all but over. But on a remote Austrian mountaintop, one final impossible battle is about to begin. A handful of American soldiers, a few German Wehrmacht officers, and a group of French VIP prisoners are trapped inside a medieval castle. Outside, the ruthless Waffen-SS is preparing to storm the gates and execute everyone inside. In this moment, enemies will become allies, and the strangest battle of World War II will unfold. This is the story of Castle Itter. Welcome to WW2 War Files. Today, we uncover one of the most bizarre and forgotten stories of the war. Our story begins not on a battlefield, but in a luxurious prison, Castle Itter. Perched high in the Austrian Alps near the town of Wurgl, this 13th-century castle was converted by the Nazis into a high-security prison for their most valuable French captives. These weren't ordinary prisoners of war. They were former prime ministers, generals, politicians, and even a tennis star, a who's who of pre-war France. They were Hitler's bargaining chips, held in relative comfort but under constant threat. The castle, with its thick stone walls and commanding views, was both a fortress and a gilded cage. Among the prisoners were Édouard Daladier, the former prime minister of France, who signed the Munich Agreement with Hitler in 1938, a decision that would haunt him. There was Paul Reynaud, his successor, who refused to surrender to Germany in 1940 and was arrested for his defiance. General Maurice Gamelin, the former commander-in-chief of the French armed forces, was also there, along with his rival, General Maxime Weygand, who had replaced him after the disastrous Battle of France. The tension between these two military leaders was palpable, their rivalry a constant undercurrent in the castle's confined quarters. And then there was Jean Boudatras, a tennis champion turned politician, known for his athleticism and daring spirit. This volatile mix of political rivals and strong personalities created a tense, claustrophobic atmosphere within the castle walls. They were united only by their shared captivity and their hatred for their captors. The prisoners lived in a strange limbo, aware that the war was ending, but uncertain of their own fate. As the Third Reich crumbled in late April 1945, the regular prison guards, sensing the inevitable defeat, fled into the night, leaving the prisoners unguarded. But their relief was short-lived. They were soon replaced by the fanatical Waffen-SS, Hitler's elite military force, who had orders to execute all prisoners rather than let them fall into Allied hands. The SS were known for their brutality and unwavering loyalty to the Nazi cause, even as the regime collapsed around them. The prisoners knew that their time was running out. In a desperate act, they decided to send out a scout to seek help from the nearest Allied forces. The man chosen for this dangerous mission was Zvonimir Chuchkovich, a Yugoslav handyman who had been working at the castle. Under cover of darkness, he slipped past the SS patrols and made his way down the mountain carrying a hastily written letter pleading for rescue. But the first person Chuchkovich found was not an American. It was Major Josef Sepp Gangl, a decorated German Wehrmacht officer. Gangl was a complex figure. He had fought bravely for Germany throughout the war, earning the Iron Cross for his service. But as the war dragged on and the true horrors of the Nazi regime became undeniable, Gangl became disillusioned. He had joined the local Austrian resistance, a dangerous act of defiance that could have cost him his life. When Chuchkovich presented him with the letter, Gangl immediately understood the gravity of the situation. He knew his small resistance force, made up of local Austrians and a handful of defecting Wehrmacht soldiers, was no match for the heavily armed SS. He made a fateful decision. He would seek out the Americans himself, under a white flag, and ask for their help in rescuing the prisoners. This is where our story takes its most surreal turn. Gangl found Captain John C. Jack Lee, Jr., a decorated American tank commander from the 23rd Tank Battalion of the 12th Armored Division. Lee was a combat veteran, a no-nonsense officer who had seen his share of action in the final months of the war. He was faced with an impossible choice. His orders were to hold his position and consolidate Allied gains, not to venture into unknown territory to save enemy politicians with the help of a German officer who just days before had been his sworn enemy. The war was essentially over, and risking American lives for French VIPs seemed like a questionable decision. But Lee, a man of action and principle, saw the human lives at stake. He looked past the uniforms and saw people in desperate need. He agreed to help. With just his own tank, a Sherman nicknamed Besotten Jenny, and a small crew of 10 men, he followed Gangl towards the castle. Along the way, they were joined by more of Gangl's Wehrmacht soldiers, men who had decided to abandon the Nazi cause and fight for something greater. It was a bizarre convoy, an American tank leading a column of German soldiers towards a castle to save French prisoners from the SS. On May 4th, Captain Lee's small American force and Major Gangl's Wehrmacht soldiers arrived at Castle Itter. The defenders of the castle were now a surreal mix: 10 American soldiers, about 20 German Wehrmacht soldiers, the French VIP prisoners, some of whom were old enough to have fought in World War I and were now picking up rifles once again, and even the SS officer who had been in charge of the prison, Kurt Siegfried Schrader, who, seeing the writing on the wall, decided to switch sides and join the defense. They had one Sherman tank, a few machine guns, and a collection of rifles. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The Waffen-SS, positioned on the hillsides around the castle and in the surrounding forest, were preparing for a full-scale assault. The SS commander, Georg Bachmann, was determined to carry out his orders and eliminate the prisoners. He had several hundred men at his disposal, along with anti-tank guns and mortars. The defenders knew they were in for a fight. This is the moment the impossible happened. Sworn enemies who had been trying to kill each other for years were now standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to die for a common cause. American GIs shared ammunition with Wehrmacht soldiers. French politicians took orders from a German major. It's stories like this, hidden gems of history, that reveal the complex, incredible, and often contradictory nature of humanity that we are dedicated to telling here at WW2 War Files. If you believe these stories need to be told, if you want to uncover more of these forgotten chapters of history, then please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to keep these incredible stories alive. Now, back to the battle. The assault began in the early hours of May 5th. The SS, under the command of Georg Bachmann, launched a probing attack, testing the castle's defenses with small arms fire and mortar rounds. The defenders, a mix of accents and languages, held their ground. The French prisoners, no longer politicians but soldiers once again, grabbed rifles and took up positions along the castle walls. Jean Borattra, the tennis champion turned politician, known for his athleticism and daring spirit, used his athleticism to vault over walls and sprint across open courtyards to deliver messages between the defenders, dodging SS fire with the same agility he had once used on the tennis court. The single Sherman tank, Besotten Jenny, provided crucial fire support, its 75mm gun booming as it targeted SS positions. But it was a fragile shield against the SS anti-tank guns that were being brought into position. In a critical moment, an 88mm shell from an SS anti-tank gun slammed into the Sherman tank, destroying it in a burst of flame and smoke. The defenders had lost their most powerful weapon. The SS infantry, emboldened by the destruction of the tank, began to advance in force, their numbers overwhelming. Ammunition was running low. The situation was desperate. Captain Lee knew they couldn't hold out much longer. He had been on the radio for hours, desperately calling for reinforcements from the 142nd Infantry Regiment, but the response was uncertain. The defenders prepared for the worst, knowing that if the SS breached the walls, there would be no mercy. It was during this intense fighting that the first hero of this impossible alliance fell. Major Gangl, The Wehrmacht officer who had initiated the rescue and who had fought bravely alongside the Americans was struck by a sniper's bullet while trying to move former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud out of harm's way. He died instantly, his body falling in the courtyard. The German officer had given his life to save his former enemy. In the chaos of battle, there was no time to mourn. The fight for survival continued. His death, however, galvanized the defenders. They fought with renewed determination, knowing that Gangel's sacrifice could not be in vain. By late afternoon, the defenders were down to their last few rounds of ammunition. The SS were preparing for their final assault, one that would surely overwhelm the castle's defenses. Captain Lee had been on the radio for hours, desperately calling for reinforcements from the 142nd Infantry Regiment, but the response was uncertain. Just as all hope seemed lost, as the SS began their final push, the rumble of tanks was heard in the distance. Reinforcements from the 142nd Infantry Regiment had arrived. The American relief force with several tanks and infantry came roaring